Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ready podcast on everything about real estate, divorce, and mortgages. And today we are going to talk about everything that you need to know about where you're going to put your head at the end of your divorce so you don't live in a van down by the river. And I know there's a lot of decisions that made a lot of input that I feel that I have, but where I wanted to start this podcast was reflecting on how our relationship unfolded, Holly, and how the concerns and the things that happen and things that go through your head, when you're starting that divorce process. Like, what was your feeling? And, we have a good relationship that was developed, but how, what were the feelings that you had that
Man.
really, I know it's a lot. So
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, I think our very first podcast, I talked about how I met you, and I said you basically had a cape on because you swooped in and really took my hand because I knew nothing about real estate when I got divorced 10 years ago. I knew nothing about mortgages. I was like, I had been a teacher, then I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. I was kind of like, oh, you don't need to know kind of a thing. So I knew nothing.
Do you know anything about vans in case you ended up living in one?
I know. How Not to Become Homeless by Holly.
There's a new Volkswagen electric van I saw the other day. They're making it an electric. That looks pretty cool.
Yeah, but
I
no
don't
one
know
wants
if
to
you
put
live in that.
But 3 kids in a van would not have been fun.
Down by the river, no.
Oh my gosh. So to answer your question, it's the most stressful point of going, in my opinion, going through a divorce is where am I going to live?
Yeah.
Can I even afford a house? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my kids? And that was giving me some serious, keeping me up at night. It was huge.
And that's, for me, it is like 1 + 1 = 2, It's that easy. It's like, on the front end, and so much of people going through a divorce, there's so much going on, and you don't know what to handle. But at the end of the divorce, you want to know where you're putting your head on that pillow. I mean, having that picture at the end takes away so much anxiety, so you can kind of look for like all the other things in between.
Yeah,
So much of speaking into what you handle is like, if so many times I meet with somebody a month or two, or even at the end, or just after the end of the divorce, and I'm looking at what's there, and I'm like, you're asking me that it's like we're up against the wall. I think divorce, so much of like what I recommend to any divorce attorney is like there's a called All Regs for mortgages. It's kind of like a law book for mortgages, and actually comes down to a debt to income ratio as for an attorney to collaborate with their client and myself, if we bring me in, that we can sit down and navigate this process from the end. Because if you know where the end is, where you're going to put your head, because that's where you're going to restart.
That's definitely
we can
smart.
do
And
that.
even in having a discussion with you last night about this topic, I started thinking that is important. I've always told my clients, depending on, I don't care, I'll let them know what the final picture might look like and whether they want to allocate more in spousal support or property settlement or however they want to do it. I tell them to talk to their accountant, talk to their financial advisor. What I learned yesterday, they should definitely talk to whoever their lender is or mortgage professional is, and come up with that. The unfortunate thing, though, Ken, is it's not always that simple while somebody's going through a divorce or recently after, but especially while they're going through a divorce, because it might be out of their control where they're going to live, or if they can move or they can't. First of all, is there already a parenting time agreement in place? Are the funds available for them to move? Which school district are they going to be in? Do they have to be in the same one or not? They need enough bedrooms for their kids. They might not be able to get, and I'm sure you can tell us more on your experience on this. Can they get approved for a mortgage or not? And is it while they're still going through a divorce or after? Obviously, if they're going to do it or try to apply while they're going through the divorce still before it's final, we're going to need a court order that allows for that. So there's many different things here. And then also recently after, are they going to get approved? And does it make more sense to rent in the meantime? Does it make more sense to buy? And I've heard people say, depending on where they live, sometimes they look at the taxes and say, oh, wow, the property taxes are more expensive than paying a rent. I recently have a client who said she looked at what it would cost to rent or to buy a place with the current interest rates versus renting. She made a decision to rent and pay, in my opinion, a ton of money in rent, but she felt more comfortable doing that for a year. I'd like to hear what Ken and Cici, what you guys think about all of that.
I would say it's just that investing your time into that decision at the end, because at the other end, you got all the stuff in the divorce. And I always imagine a person has always dealt with like a lot of anxiety. I'm a thinker, and I worry too much. And Christina knows this. is in between that time there, it's like there's so much worry, and sometimes you don't know where that worry comes from or what it is. And so much of it is like when you have that picture painted of what the possibilities are of where you can restart in your home, when you bring us in at the beginning, there's no, like, we're, as a loan officers, we're not really allowed to, it's like a free consultation. So when we're brought in there, hearing what you say, there's suggestions I can make, and really tying our industries together, really it comes down to a debt to income ratio. And within the debt to income ratio, if we work backwards in the judgment of divorce and what people are getting, there's a lot of very creative ways where you can make simple manipulations where people get the exact amount of money or everything that they want, and both spouses are able to restart. Sometimes egos will get in front of that, and that's okay. But a lot of
Whose
times,
egos? The lawyer's egos?
The lawyer.
Do lawyers have egos?
To be honest with you, a lot of it is the lawyer's egos. I think our lawyers, like,
But not Jeff.
they don't realize how much that we can invest into that. And I think good loan officers will come into that situation. And for me, it's always about imagining. This is like the hardest point in your life.
Yeah.
You want it. I can paint the picture. It may not be the most important thing, but it may be the most important thing. But it's important no matter what.
I'm sure people appreciate that.
It is, and going to the debt to income, there's also another element talking about equity. How are you going to share the equity? How are you going to divide equity? What does that look like?
From the property you're selling, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you have a court order to remove the other significant's name off of the mortgage, when you do a cash out refinance, if it's ordered by the judge in the divorce decree, it's a lower interest rate, which is beneficial. It has to be. Oh,
is it?
It is. So you can do cash out, but have a rate and term. I know this is a lot of lingo. This is kind of dry, but it's important.
Yeah, don't put us to sleep here.
I know.
But
I'll
this is actually really interesting. And there's somebody I'm going to probably hopefully call you this afternoon that was asking me a question that obviously I'm not qualified to answer regarding doing the exact thing where they're getting the spouse off a mortgage, but they're going to assume the loan. And they asked if they have to go ahead and refinance it under the new rates now. And what I told them, I have no clue because I don't know.
With a few of the clients, because we work with a lot of divorce attorneys, we'll have the two come together, or one who's going to assume the mortgage and want to do the cash out, but get the rate and term so they can cash a person out. Now, it depends on how long they own the house. It could be 2 years, which is a little bit harder, but it could be 5, 10, whatnot. And I know we discussed in a previous podcast how that value, if spouse A came to the table with the property, what that looks like. I don't want to go into it.
It's all different.
I don't want to go into it, but here's
just one from
Sure.
the other day, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Christina. If I am, then I'll hold off my explanation. But she's looking at me.
She's giving you the floor.
Sorry.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
No, it's just
it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission.
Matt, and it was they have to split the equity. It's $100,000, but within the judgment of divorce, it was he has to pay her $2,000 or $1,000 a month in alimony, and the car loan, which is in his name, she has to pay. Well, the problem is she wants to get a house, and then he wants to get a house, and what a very simple explanation was within the distribution of the equity, we give it a directive, and to pay off the car from that was proceeds.
Okay.
And I even said, it's like, throw an extra couple thousand bones, make it worth her while, because the biggest thing is in the current house that he has. He had everything set up. He wrenches on cars and makes a lot of side money doing that, and it was going to be a really big problem because he couldn't qualify. So I go to her, say, listen, and the distribution of equity, have that modified, and so you
to have the car paid off.
The car be paid off because it was in his name,
and then
she
reduce
has
the
to have
monthly
6 payments before it was, and they both want to cut that umbilical cord. Don't let it sit on for 6 months. So I said, you don't necessarily have to make the suggestion where you give a couple thousand extra, but it was important to him to get beyond it.
Then they did a stipulated order following your advice and permitted them to do that. That's great.
So it's like there's so many solutions on the front end when you bring us in where we really can. And my point is just my goal is just to restart, man, control and delete, so to speak, and when you can cut the umbilical cord from the beginning as quickly as possible, there's so many different options to do that. So
how long after receiving spousal support, is there any sort of rule? I've always heard from people in your industry and from banks and lenders that somebody needs to receive spousal support for roughly 6 months in order to get approved for a mortgage. Somebody recently who met with me told me that she could get it done much sooner. I don't know. Is there any sort of rule or anything you guys have to follow to do that?
Okay. It's 6 months, and you can do it from not just from the actual judgment of the divorce, but if you started from the front end and they're separated and living separately.
So if you start an interim support situation, that'll give you start getting credit at that point.
6 months
Support
for
order,
child support, 6 months for alimony, and
child support too.
Child support and alimony, but with FHA, and a lot of people do decide to go FHA. It's a Federal Housing Administration loan. It's 3 months.
Okay.
So there's different guidelines, and again, speaking into the broad stroke, like if you have one spouse that is hasn't been working, it's also if they back to work for 6 months, they can use that income to qualify. So when you have somebody at the start making the decision if they're going to go back to work now or whenever, having these things, it's like, having these answers is important to like.
So sometimes it may not be necessarily the best idea wait until after a divorce is final to go get a job if you weren't working at the time. However, I'm based on what you said, it makes me think that if they want to apply for a mortgage and don't have the cash or the other assets in order to be able to support that. But then again, everybody I think needs to talk to their own attorney and figure out, their own situation, because every situation is different. But it's important for the attorney to
I'll give you the facts
to communicate with you to find out, what to ultimately help the client to set them up to where it could ease the process after the divorce is done.
The federal government gives guidelines. It's called all regs. It's much like a law book. It's we're not as cool as lawyers, but just kidding. But it's
you have better hair.
All regs kind of give a measuring stick of what we can use for income, and it's considered predatory lending to like give people loans that can't afford it, and they give us all these rules and guidelines. And so a lot of times, everything being modified a little bit, can just make a complete difference in how you do that control delete and move forward for both spouses.
Yeah,
and have so many stories I can share about little things that we've recommended and did and amended the judgment of divorce where it worked out better for everybody, because nobody wants it to go on for 6 months a year.
No, that's true. Question on timing actually also, and maybe CC you can answer this one, but how long does it typically take for somebody to refinance or get somebody off a loan on a house? Realistically, how long does that process take?
So good question. So during the divorce procedure, we actually start the documents, make sure like if they're working, because here's the thing. If you're dividing, let's say, the equity of the home and you're cashing the person out, you need to know what that appraisal is to understand how much the equity is going to be.
And that's the bank's appraisal, right?
That's a bank's appraisal.
Okay,
why
which
go
is
get an appraisal?
Than the appraisals we use to determine value in the divorce, which are appraisers for purposes of the divorce.
Exactly. So here's the problem. What if your appraiser said the house was worth $480 and the appraisal came back on my end at $422? Now what?
Somebody's gonna have to
home equity line. It's just more work.
Okay.
So coming to me and Ken, we're just at the tail end. This is the last part. Like you have child custody, everything's all said and done. You're at the tail end. You come to me. So because an appraisal is only good for 3 months.
Okay.
You want to save this to the end. That'll be the last decision on the table.
Would you say once somebody gets going, they have all their ducks in a row? Does it take 30 days, 60 days, 90 days?
What does it take? 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
Depending on the appraisal.
But sometimes things can go wrong, right? And they might need more time?
Oh, loans can go sideways, but we have high hopes.
Well,
and if they're organized.
Here's why I'm asking this. A lot of times, a lot of cases I get may not necessarily be new divorces, but they're post-judgment issues. Things where people are back in court after the divorce is done. And what I see too often is almost people were set up for failure to where they have a 30-day window or period of time to refinance somebody. Otherwise, the property needs to be sold or whatever the threat in there is or the trigger is.
Yes.
I don't like that. I like to do at a minimum 90 days and then do an extension that if somebody could show good faith efforts to get the property refinanced, then they get an automatic, whether it be 30 days or 45 or whatever else it is. And I know there's some pushback from getting the other side to agree to that, but you got to tell them, listen, we got to be realistic about this.
But it's important to set that up because a lot of individuals aren't structured. There's a lot of divorce attorneys that don't say, go seek someone, talk to someone in our profession during the process. So if I'm at the tail end of the divorce, I just need that divorce decree signed. But to have my appraisal is more of a true value appraisal of what the bank sees, not what an attorney may say or do. So what we can do is, if it's at the tail end, we get all their ducks in a row. They know they're approved financially. This is now someone that's not relying on child support or spousal support. Let me just put that in there, because clearly that won't work. But as soon as that appraisal comes in, they can negotiate that equity. Then they can put that in put it in the divorce decree, sign it, be done. When we get that signed document from the judge, we can finish up the mortgage within, what, 5 days?
Signed document. It could, very quickly.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's good to know. Another question I have for you guys is, and I know you're in the business of people buying property, buying houses. Does it ever make more sense, in your opinions, for somebody to rent than to buy, whether it be temporary or, usually I think nobody goes in with the mindset that they're going to rent long term, but usually temporary. Does it ever make sense for somebody to rent in the meantime? And whichever one of you wants to take this question, please let me know.
I wrote some questions, and really I can just, it's like the if then, if you remember the if thens in
geometry,
or coding, there's so many if thens into that equation.
I went
the
to
first
law
one
school.
is, what do you prefer?
it was 10th grade.
What do you prefer? Do you prefer renting or do you prefer buying? Most people are probably going to prefer buying as opposed to renting.
Well, I think most people might prefer it, but the question is, can they?
Yeah, that's the next question is, can they? What can you afford? And, what school district do you want to be in? And how do you analyze the numbers, and how do you break everything down? So it's...
And I hear this all the time. Does it make sense, given current interest rates and also current taxes, depending on which city or township you want to be in? Sometimes it seems like the taxes alone are more than what rent would be, and
I've never seen anything like that. But if anything, I think we heard of an example of that, but very rarely. Sometimes you might get a steal of a rent if you get somebody renting you $3,000 for the place, and they own the house free and clear, but they're worth like $600,000 now, or the rent. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying necessarily the equivalent. Like, for example, if there's a house in Birmingham that has taxes of $3,000 a month, if somebody were to buy it, they can rent, it might be more than $3,000, but they can rent a really nice place without having to worry about paying the taxes. And also, again, I keep hearing it with the interest rate. What's your thoughts on interest rates?
Well, first of all, very rarely on the carrying cost of a mortgage will the rent be less than what you can. Much less than what you get on the mortgage payment. And then, and I'm not an accountant, and it's very important as a licensed loan officer that I state this, but there's tax shelters that you get from an accountant. So a lot of times I recommend keeping the taxes separate, and the extra tax return you can get will more than pay for the taxes.
So talk to your accountant before you make a decision.
We can make a decision with your accountant and what that answer is, but it's the stability of owning a place, which is what most people prefer. But some people may just not want that. But we have that discussion. And the most important thing is, when I close loans, that's how we make a living and make a commission, but it's never about me. It's always about the customer, what they want, and the facts. So when we just have that discussion on the front end, if you did that day one and they had the divorce and they said 100% we're going through with this, they talk to me, they're going to have those answers set, like not necessarily, not the answers, but the questions to contemplate. So through that process, they can come to that decision.
So with renting, obviously I sell houses, so I'm always like, let's buy a house. But to answer your question, when do people rent? It's typically more expensive. Right now, rents are crazy high. But you have to look at what they're doing. So if their kids are, let's say they have teenagers like I do. My kids are 15, 17, and 19. In my mind, my son is starting junior year, and my middle daughter's in senior. My oldest has graduated. But I want to have a place in Florida. So I'm going to be back and forth. So a lot of times they'll look at it like, and I do have people, the only time I really say it's a great idea to rent is if they know they're not going to be here long term. So like with where house prices are right now, we know, and Ken can and Cece can attribute, the rate's set to go up. So if you were to buy a house right now, I get a question all the time, well, if I sell it in 2 years, will I make my money? And the truth is, right now, I always tell them the truth. Maybe not. There's a really good chance that unless you get at least 8% more, because you got to look at your costs of, you're paying all the seller side. And we just don't know that that's going to happen with what we foresee. So
but you're building equity, aren't you?
Well, but not, if you're
Not
moving
fast
not in
enough.
2 years.
I
So if
don't
someone
know.
says, I
Or-
want to move in 2 years, and I know for sure they want to do that, that's probably the only time I'll say, you might want to look at renting. Now, if we were in the days of the 3% and, you know, looks like it's going to stay like that, but for what we're looking at the rate to continue to go up, you're not looking at a great situation. Dave Ramsey said right now is the best time to sell within the next 5 years. That's what he said. And he's a big real estate guy. It's how we got to start. So I tell them those things because I don't ever want I don't want to just sell someone a house. I want them to know, you know, this is what you have to look at. Without the crystal ball, no one has it. You still have to look at your costs.
What if somebody doesn't want the maintenance though? And I understand they can
Yeah.
go buy a condo with an association fee and whatever, but then that's also an added expense.
True.
Depending on how much that fee is, also then I guess that's where you need an accountant to figure it all out.
But it's not always about numbers. It's about that intrinsic value of what you want. 'Cause
Exactly.
You're right.
your lifestyle?
Because if you're going to move into a house and have, you know, to do with all this, but maybe you just want to rent a place for a couple of years and not to deal with
and
all
I've
that,
had a lot of
and
clients
to
say
have
that.
clear that. And
There
that's
will-
totally
Especially if you don't know where you're going to go.
Yeah.
Like if someone knows that they want to move out of state, but they're staying for a set amount of time.
Or for their kids to finish school,
or
graduate.
whatever it is. And of course, like you mentioned, you know, they have to stay within a certain vicinity, the other parent.
Yes, they do.
And so they're thinking, okay, well, I will rent for this amount of time and then I'll move. But, you know, I would say you want the asset. So when you can buy, you know you're going to stay, it always makes more sense to
I'll
buy
bring this
regardless of rate. We like to say you marry the house and you date the rate, right?
Yeah, but also, what if it needs a bunch of maintenance and needs whatever? So, you know,
I know
I don't know that
coming
there's
to
a
an
direct
end, but
answer.
I like to inject like one little story. And I'm sorry if I'm trumping you here. It's
No.
just like one of the things I'm most proud of because our friendship that we've had with you and Christina that we have over the years, we tie a stream back to when you were going through your divorce, and there was bumps in the road of getting your mortgage, and I think you were told
Just a
no by a
few.
couple different companies, and he came to me and I had my cape on, so
Yeah.
to speak. Not with like once in a while we gotta like not be humble and like I was to be here, but it was like you looked up at what we were able to do and to navigate through that process. You know, it's really important to find that right person because we were able to get you into that first house, and then you were able to tap into some equity and get to the next house.
Yep.
And I know that the house that you're in right now was great for your kids, was great for this in the school district, exactly where you wanted them. And as they're migrating and getting done with high school, you got a ton of equity. So if you imagine if you wanted that house, and we wanted to find a solution to navigate that, you know, had you not found me in my cape.
Right.
Well,
I might have
this is
just
the
thought
only
I
thing
had
I'm
to-
good at, so I'm going to brag.
No,
I can't
I
fix
might have
anything
just
around
thought
the house.
I had to rent or I had to go move in
But-
with family, but I was
Yeah.
like, I'd rather live in a box. You know, I need my own space.
I'm
and
proud of it because you deserved it.
Speaking
I'm
of
so proud to be your
superhero
friend and-
Ken,
yeah.
how's it going? Are you going to weigh in today, or are you trying to avoid that?
I will.
Oh.
Last thing is this: I am very
No judgment zone.
No, it isn't. I'm feeling very confident about where I am within the process. Within that said, there was a lot of things you draw a string, not to make excuses. It's really important because I know part of you wants to like.
I think he's wordsmithing this right
But
now.
I actually feel good at where I'm at.
So
even
was part of the
though as I
process where
step
you
on,
continue to peak or go up and
It-
wait
it's
before
about-
you start
it's-
going
it
down
turns
again?
out-
or
Coming to
what?
terms about
I
a
was in
diet.
Florida for 10 days with my daughter, but whatever. But no, very seriously though, for people going through divorce, it's like when you're going through that emotion, it's just like be strong. I'm going to do this. And
Listen,
at the end of
it's-
the year, I'm not going to give up to the fact.
you know
that I'm
what?
gonna
It's
do
a good
this.
point because it's not always going to be better. It gets worse before it gets better a lot of times. So I got your point now. Let's see.
So, but no, that's sincere though.
I just give you credit for doing this. I know I wouldn't do it on a podcast. I wouldn't step on a
Has
scale.
anybody calibrated that scale properly?
Right. Don't forget you have shoes on. And you drank a lot of coffee today.
252.6.
Okay. What were
Okay.
you last
So
time?
I
Do we
was like
remember?
249. So.
Okay.
So
okay.
vacation. All right. So we're
This
going
is
to
not
wipe the
most
slate
accurate
clean.
scale, so.
But that's the same
Vacation.
scale you used last time. Or are we keeping consistent with the scale?
I don't know. You know, it's.
All right.
I'm
You
not
know
worried
what?
about that.
You know what? Next week's
It's
a
the
new
same scale.
week.
New
You're gonna be
week.
focused
Tomorrow.
now.
Not
I don't
even
think
next
you're
week.
going to
Why
Flores.
start Monday? Start today.
All right. Well,
All right.
So I will.
You got
I am
this.
I'm
You
gonna
got
do
this.
Hopefully next month I'll have some progress, but I really am investing myself into this process of doing it. And I think as people are hurting going through it, a lot of times when you're going through something negative or you're going through some hard times, something is always there to pull you down, and then you have to let that go and just like keep your mind on the focus on moving forward, though.
You're right.
There's a lot of decisions that I've made that I think are on the right decision. On the 10 days I was in Florida, I probably shouldn't have had those fried foods, a little bit less.
Those 8 margaritas a day.
12 beers.
Right.
All right.
Well, thank you, everybody. This has been great.
This is great information.
Yes, a
Thank you,
lot
guys.
of information. You may
Yeah.
want to listen to this twice.
Even if you have further questions, I think you guys know how to contact us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yes.
Good luck.
Have a great week, guys.
Bye.